The shop. Today we are talking glue, and I just finished up the second glue test, the second half of the big glue test, the great glue test, and just put out the video on that. But I've had a whole pile of questions coming about glues and types, and now that I've looked at and compared 64 different glues, I figured it'd be a good time to do a live video where I can see what questions you have and kind of go off of those. So we're going to be having a good bit of fun on here. A little bit about upcoming projects. I'm actually working on dropping some glue off my bench to make sure it's on the floor. We're making a, wow, I'm having problems. I'm making a tool tote. And so this is something I'm probably going to be doing the first live of the new year. We're going to be doing a series on making a tote. And this is something I'm going to do a video of how to build it to begin with. And then in the lives, we're going to go through it step by step. And so one day we're going to look at making the dovetails on the angle. Another day we're going to be looking at making the groove on an angle. Another day we're looking at resawing a bottom from it. Another day we'll be looking at bending a handle, and so we'll have a bent handle in the top of this. And then we'll have a divider in the side, so there'll be a bunch of little options and things like that that you can make it your own, but we'll actually do this step by step. So this will be a good beginner's project because there's a lot of different things, of different methods of sawing, different methods of cutting joinery, and so this should be an interesting build altogether. As well as joining up the bottom and making two pieces into one and bending wood and some other interesting things like that. So I'm really looking forward to that. Hopefully I will have the how-to video out here soon, and so you can get an idea about what that will be coming. But I will be releasing the plans for that ahead of time, so if you want to, you can actually follow along and have the video live in the shop with you while I'm live here, and so you can actually be building along and asking questions as you run into them. So an interesting idea. A couple other things coming up. I'm in the process of making plans for building a kneeling chair, because I want, it's an ergonomic chair that you actually kneel on as opposed to sitting upright in, and it's something I really enjoy, but that will be coming up here soon. So yeah, glue. So for those of you who don't know, I did a massive glue test where I went through 64 different types of glues, from contact cements to wood glues to epoxies to everything in between, and as many other types as I can. Bone glue, fish glue, hide glue, and then put them all head to head at long grain to long grain, end grain to long grain, exterior conditions, and gap filling. And it was very interesting to see how some of those worked out on there. Wow, I need some cheese and it's coming back at me. You never know what you're going to get on live. So I wanted to, most of my conclusions and everything that was, or have in those videos. So if you want to look for that, just go on to YouTube and search for The Great Glue Test and it'll come up on there. I have an older video that I did about a year ago with the first 32 glues, and then I put out a video on this channel just this last week with the second set of 32 glues, making 64 total. So a good series of them. So I thought I'd answer a couple of the questions that I've been getting and then open it up for you and see what you want to know about the glues. So number one, the question I probably have gotten the most is, what has changed in my shop? So yes, I've done the glue test, but has anything actually affected what I do? And the two big things are, number one, for normal daily use. In the first test, I tested 2P10 and a couple different cheap super glues. And I was actually really surprised by these. And beforehand, super glue for me was just like gluing a splinter back in place that might have come out. And after doing the tests, I trust super glue a lot more. Now, I am going to be starting a long-term test, which you can see starting right back here. And that's one of the questions I have, is super glue something that will last long-term? So I have a set of boards that I'm going to be testing every 6 months for the first few years, and then once a year for up to 30 years. So this will be a long test. Whether or not we actually finish it before I die, who knows?
I guess it depends on your life expectancy.
But are you testing super glue?
Good thing he's got life insurance.
Yeah. In that, I'm going to be testing super glue, be testing a couple PVAs, testing epoxy, testing a high glue, and seeing how those do long term. And I picked the ones that the study has shown these are good glues, but how well do they actually last long term? So this should be very interesting to see, as all of these boards will be up in my garage going through the yearly expansion and contraction for years to come, and we'll actually then go test them. So it should be kind of interesting to see how that comes out. So I'll probably be doing a video as those come out. But back to the question, what has changed in my shop? I trust super glue far, far more. And I've been doing several projects where that's about all I use, because it's very fast, it's very efficient, especially with the gels and the thick super glues. They hold really well, they go on really easily, and they actually lock and hold well together. I did a video with the, where did my vise go? Oh, it's over there. I made the small parts vise, and I did that completely with super glue. And I've been really, really happy with it. I haven't had any issue, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it does in the future. That being said, it's not my go-to for general woodworking, but if ever I'm working with a small piece on another small piece, I'm probably going to use super glue. It's quick, it's easy, and it's efficient. You have Type Bond Original, Type Bond 3, and Type Bond, Type Bond 2. And as you expect, Original is a little weaker, Type Bond 2 is pretty good, and Type Bond 3 is the strongest of them. And so most people expect me to then go to Type Bond 3. But generally, I still stick with Type Bond 2 because I can buy it in jugs really easily. It's the cheapest per capita, and so it's the one I've been using quite a bit, and so I was very happy with that choice. But on this test, I did a couple other ones. Number one, the 4 quarters. This is from Brooklyn Tool and Craft. It's also sold by Tools for Working Wood, and they came up with they picked a couple different formulas, and they came up with this one. And then I also tried the Elmer's Wood Glue Max, and both of these I was very, very surprised by. The Elmer's Wood Glue Max was incredibly strong. It beat out all the Type Bonds I had, even the Type Bond Extend and others of that nature. And the 4 quarters did incredibly well. It was stuck up there a good bit. So I'm asking myself, do I want to get something that I think is a little bit stronger than the Type Bond? Now the Type Bond is still relatively cheap in comparison, and I usually get it in a gallon, and the gallon lasts me for about a year or so. So I'm thinking about switching to one of these two, but I'm going to see about size capacity. Can I buy a larger capacity of them? So that's something that has immediately affected me. I think the other big thing is anytime I want to use a high glue, I don't have to go and use a high glue that I have to water down and then heat up. The Type Bond Genuine High Glue, this stuff is really, really good. And I trust it, I like it, and so if I need a high glue, I'm probably going to be grabbing this because it's much, much easier than using this. But if I do ever want to use a high glue, I'm probably going to start thinking about using a bone glue instead, because I found the bone glue to be far stronger than the high glue. So maybe. But the high glue is weaker, and so a lot of times you might use that in instruments or things like that where you might want to be able to take them apart. It's easier to break them apart. It's easier to disassemble them once they've been glued up. So those are the big things that have changed for me. Oh, the other thing is exterior. I used to use Type Bond 3, as it says, exterior or interior waterproof. It ain't waterproof. All of the PVAs did not last well in the water. Testing them in wet condition, they fell right off. I will not use Type Bond 3 exterior in any case I'm planning on having water in. It will harden after it has been moist, but when it's wet, it becomes very loose and it doesn't have any strength to it. So for exterior use, I had switched over to using epoxy, but then, oh, where'd my wood weld go?
Did you throw it on the floor?
No, that was the other one. I think I left that in here. Oh, there it is. Then in this test, I used plastic resin wood weld by DAP. And I was absolutely blown away with this. This is incredibly strong stuff. And it beat out most of the glues in regular use as well as in exterior use. It was by far the best glue. So if I'm doing things exterior, this is what I'm going to be using. This is great stuff. So that was the biggest thing for me. If I'm working outside, I might use an epoxy, but I'm probably going to be using the wood weld, which in the video, for some reason, my mind completely blanked out, and I called it something else. But yeah, it's DAP wood weld, plastic resin. So those are the biggest things that have probably changed for me. So what questions do we have? There are too many things on my bench, knocking them all over.
Related question, Nick L. asked, Asian cultures have used rice to seal letters and the like. Is there a rice-based glue to test?
There are lots of different recipes for rice glues. The reason I didn't test one is that it's generally intended to be a temporary glue. It's something that has a loose hold. There are a few recipes for making a good wood glue, but I haven't been able to get a hold of them, and they're pretty rare and obscure, so I just didn't have the time and capability to put it in this test. But most of them aren't going to stand up to most of these glues because they're not intended to be a strong holding wood glue. Though there are recipes out there I've been told are strong holding wood glues, and I would love to try them, but haven't yet. So I think that they would be, my expectation is they're going to be somewhere around a weak hide glue, but I don't know. I haven't tested them, so we'll see. I had someone else asking me, what about gluing together leather and wood, or any like flexible surface and wood? I've heard some people about using vinyl or something of that nature. How do you glue those together? And I had been using contact cement, but the tests I've done on the leather to wood here, I found the contact cement doesn't hold very well. But in trying some of the other things, I have found that hide glue actually works really, really well for flexible things like leather. And on my holdfast, I have leather onto steel, and it's been held on there for years with hide glue. So I'm actually thinking next time I'm going to be doing anything like a vinyl surface or a leather or something of that nature, I'm probably going to be doing more with hide glue attaching that than contact cement. But yeah, contact cement tends to be a little more flexible, but it just doesn't have quite the holding power of hide glue, which was very surprising because it's surprisingly good stuff. So I say surprisingly a lot.
Surprising.
What else we got?
Let's see. Thomas Hubler asked, do you not use Gorilla Glue?
Gorilla Glue, do I have it in here? Yes, I do. Now, Gorilla Glue is a, what's the word I'm looking for? Poly. It's an expanding foam glue. And when I was getting into woodworking, people were telling me this is what you should use for gap filling because it creates a foam that will expand and fill into the gaps. And that really makes a lot of sense. But in testing and gap filling, this stuff did not last at all. It was a very, very weak glue. So do not use regular Gorilla Glue for gap filling. It doesn't work well for there. Now for long grain to long grain, it held fairly well. It did not hold as well as the PVAs or epoxies or other things like that, or even the super glues, but it still held relatively well for a really good joint long grain to long grain. The downside to it is you need to have a lot of pressure, and there's always a lot of cleanup as it likes to expand and go all over the place. But if you have to, yeah. But there are far better glues that are easier to get to than a Gorilla Glue. Now I did test the Gorilla Wood Glue, which was relatively good. I think it was, let me look at the list. It was in the top quarter. Here. Yeah, the one thing that regular Gorilla Glue did do well on is it did relatively well on long grain to long grain exterior. It held onto the glue fairly well, the wood very well there. Let's see. Long grain to long grain. Trying to remember where the Gorilla Glue. Yeah, the Gorilla Wood Glue was in the top quarter at 395 psi. So it's a good glue. I put it right around where Type Bond 2 is. Where was Type Bond 2? Yeah, Type Bond 2, Type Bond 50, they're all right around the same spot. So if I were using Titebond 2, I find this to be about the same thing. So, yeah. What's next?
Let's see. Troy Jacobson asked, how is the working time on the, is it 4x4?
It
says TFWW says it is fast setting.
Yeah, the 4/4 glue is it is a faster setting glue up. It doesn't have quite as much work time as the Titebond does. It is a little bit quicker to clean up, but the really nice thing about this is that it cures quickly. So if you're in a series where you need to glue it up and then you need to do something else to it, with Titebond, you glue it up and you have to leave it clamped for at least 20 to 30 minutes, and you usually want to leave it clamped for a good hour. And before you put much pressure on it, you really need to let it sit overnight. With this stuff, you can glue it up, clamp it down, in 15 to 20 minutes you can take it apart and do some other things to it. Now it's still going to take a full 24 hours to really set up and cure thoroughly, but it is surprisingly strong over a short period of time. And so that's one of the reasons I like it. So yes, if you are doing a fast and hurried glue up, then you're probably not going to want to use the 4/4. The Extend is something that I really like for that Titebond Extend. It is a longer, slower glue. So if you're in a rushed glue up where you have all these parts to put together, Titebond Extend might do it for you. And it's surprisingly strong. I was very, very happy with the Titebond Extend. I expected it because it was slower to then be weaker, but it held up really, really well. But for a lot of things, 99% of the glue ups, the time that the 4/4 gives you is far more than you need. It is still faster than Titebond, but it will set up quicker so you can then get back on the project and go to other things. So if you are looking for that time savings, the 4/4 is a great one to have. But yes, it does go a little bit faster. What's next?
Let's see. Nick L asked, what's the open time difference between PVA and bone glue?
Bone glue is a little bit faster, but it all depends on how hot you bring up the bone glue or how much water you put into it. It acts almost, it feels, acts, and glues almost identical to most hide glues. So it has about the same open time on that, the same working time. Honestly, I didn't feel or see or really smell much of any difference between them, other than the hide glue was a good bit stronger.
You can't smell anything.
You can smell hide glue. Hide glue has a yeah, it's pungent. But yeah, I found the open time on it to be very similar to hide glue. So depending upon the temperature, it's pretty close to most PVAs, most like Titebond 2. So yeah. What's next?
Spencer Goddard asks or says, howdy from Kansas. Do you know any tricks to stop the glue runs from looking very obvious under a stain? Perhaps I'm not doing it right. Thanks.
Yes. Yeah. That's one of the big problems with most of the PVAs is once they get into the wood, they stop the stains and finishes from absorbing into the wood. So yeah, if you wipe them off really, really well with water while they're still wet, most of the time you can get it out, but not always. Once they are dry, you have to take out a little bit of wood. So you have to do some sanding to get down to bare wood, so then it will absorb in. So that's one of the big problems with PVAs. With hide glues, it's one of the really nice things with the hide glue is that if there is a drip and you clean off the drip, hide glue is generally finish transparent, so the finish will go through the hide glue to the wood. So if you have drips with hide glue, it's not as much of a problem. So if you are in one of those tight spaces where you're not going to be able to clean out all the drips and things, you may want to think about using hide glue because it does really, really well for that. But yeah, PVAs and epoxies, they tend to have that issue with seeing the colors through it. But yeah, generally what I try and do in that case is I let them harden up, and I try to mitigate any drips from actually dripping, so I don't put too much glue in there so it's all dripping all over the place. And then I will come back through and either plane or card scraper down to get down to bare wood underneath the glue. I find that to be far more reliable than trying to wipe it off wet, because if you're good with wiping it off wet, you can get it all off. But if you miss any spot, you're never going to see it until you go and put the finish on, and then it stands out like a sore thumb. And so I generally find the post scraping to be the best way to answer that. But yeah. What we got?
Let's see. Mike Bourdeau asked, how long did you let the glues cure before putting your test pieces outside?
I let them cure whatever the manufacturer had on them. So different glues, the ones that took longer, I did those earlier in the process. Most of the boards took me 3 or 4 days to get them all glued up. And then with the exterior ones, I waited until I had the entire series ready before then taking them outside. And so the exterior ones were the ones that had been sitting the longest in it. But they have all cured at least what the manufacturer recommended for cure time. All of the PVAs were inside for a solid week before I took them out. The last ones were on there were the epoxies, which have the 24-hour cure time, and they're good to go. So yes, I did have the cure time in mind for that. And I had a lot of people asking me about clamping pressure. And I used these squeeze clamps on here. And one of the nice things about those is I can actually adjust the amount of pressure on there, because I know the size of the block. It's 3/4 of a square inch. So I can measure the PSI by how much pressure am I putting in that clamp. And the nice thing about those is the more I open them up, the more pressure they're exerting. And so I can put a wedge on the back side and measure the distance that they're open, and then that will tell me how much pressure they're putting on there. So I put the amount of pressure on each block that the manufacturer recommended for that particular clamp up. So yes, I was actually keeping track of how much pressure I put on each block, putting it to whatever the recommended pressure is. Like for epoxies, 105, they really don't care about the pressure. As long as it's enough to squeeze it down, it's good. With the tight bonds, you need a good deal of pressure on those, and so you really need to squeeze those out. I think it was like 100, 115 PSI that they needed, so it was a significant pressure. No, that's off. I'd have to go look it up. But yeah, I actually went through and looked at what all the pressures are, and if a manufacturer didn't list what the pressure should be, then I took the average of what I had on the list. So that was something I took in mind, as well as the humidity in the shop and a whole bunch of other things that were all taken into consideration.
Because you are weird and like to do those things.
I am very, very picky, especially when it comes to science and study. It's very much me.
You just like to Excel document everything.
I don't know what you're talking about. I love Excel.
I know you love Excel. Mm-hmm.
What's next?
Well, you have a super chat from Digimer that you need to address.
Ah, Digimer, how's it going? What do you ask?
It says, fine if no one else will call for a dad joke.
You have the book there. Do you want it?
Well, does it turn into a mom joke if I do a joke then? Does it matter, Digimer?
Doesn't matter.
Okay. How about, what is the first thing new team members, what's the first thing Santa teaches his new team members when they come to the North Pole?
What?
The alphabet. Look, I even had an elf joke and Alan isn't here. Y'all can razz him.
Would it be also known as the Sarah bit?
I don't have a duck to throw at you right now. Wait, oh no, those are earplugs. I thought they were mini ducks. I really need to just tell Krista and Luke to just buy me a bunch of duckies to throw at you.
Please don't give her any more projectiles.
Oh, did Jimmer like the joke? Yay!
Thanks, man. What we got next?
Okay, let's see. Jonathan Haynie says, is it possible to calculate the best glue for the money, like strength %?
That was something I wanted to add in there. And there are lots of other things like open time and curing time and functionality and slipperiness or grab. And there are a lot of other characteristics that I would like to put into the chart. And that way you could cross-reference price per One of the things I do want to go in there is put in a price per PSI rating. I think that would be kind of interesting to see. What's your bang for your pressure? But yeah, that is one of the big reasons why I generally have used the gallon size Type Bond 2, because it is readily available, it's relatively cheap, and stood up relatively well in comparison to the others. So I would like to add that into the list in the future. If I do, I will be listing that on the HiveMind. Wow, I'm having issues. So if you don't know the HiveMind, it's a group on Facebook called the Wood by Wright HiveMind group. And that's where I probably have most contact with the fans and people who are watching. So, and I also bounce a bunch of ideas. Hey, I'm thinking about working on this. What do you think? So hop on there, and if I do put that on there, then I'll let everyone know. I might have to now that I've talked about it. But it's one of those things where I just have to do a lot of sitting down and actually calculating. And then in some of these, the price is wildly different. Like this particular bone glue that I tested comes from Germany. So in Germany, it would be relatively cheap to get. And for me, it would be relatively expensive to get. So which price do we go by? That's one of those. And then like a homemade hide glue. How in the world do I calculate that? I don't know.
Well, you could price out per ingredient.
Oh yeah, like go kill a deer and then use the hide, but do I then price out the price of the gun?
Because you killed the deer to make that hide glue.
Well, I got it from a friend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the hide glue didn't catch me anything other than not telling my wife that I used her crock pot to make it. But
please, like I couldn't smell that a mile away. Use my oven to do panning.
What else we got?
Hang on. Blue Kestral. You suggested epoxy for a cutting board. What kind of epoxy should I use?
This is cutting boards. Anytime you're talking about something in the kitchen, then you get a bunch of people who are really uptight about, is it food safe? And the question is, what do you consider food safe? And everyone is going to put that line in a different spot. For me, I have absolutely no problem using epoxy to do a cutting board. The minuscule amount of possible slight transfer is so underwhelming that it is not a problem or a concern in any way to me. But there are people out there who, yes, this is a serious concern. And the problem is there really isn't a good natural waterproof glue. There just really isn't much of a chance. A lot of people have been saying casein glue, which is made from milk, but every test I've done with casein glue it has not stood up to any of the standards. I have not found a recipe of casein glue that actually holds up in water, and I have not found one that holds up even outside of water. So it's not a glue I'd try. I mean, hide glues are great, but the moment they get any water, they release. So hide glue would not be a good thing for that. I mean, the wood weld plastic resin would be a great water glue, but you know, how well do you trust it? And then none of these glues are going to say food safe, because that's just a pain in the backside to go through. So it's one of those questions you have to ask yourself of what do you consider food safe? For me, epoxy, yeah. Weldwood, yeah, I probably trust it. Just because the minute amount of glue in that joint is just not going to cause much of a transfer issue. But again, personal preference, so something you have to kind of ask yourself. I hope I answered that question.
All right, you ready?
Yep.
So Bob Brewer has the question everybody wants to know the answer to. I store my wood glue in the garage. Should I bring it inside when it is cold? Does temperature affect it?
Yes. Especially, if it just gets cold, like, down to, 35 degrees or so, it's not as much of a problem. You have to warm it up then before you use it, otherwise it just runs slowly. But if it gets into freezing, then you can very easily ruin the glue almost instantly. Even with the epoxies, even the epoxies you generally have to have warm when you're using them. But PVAs, most wood glues, if they freeze, they go bad. So yes, bring them in out of the warm. So I usually store them wherever you store your household paints, because paint you don't want to freeze either. But very, very good question. One of the nice things about wood weld is that it's a powder that you then have to mix with water to create. So you have to mix it up every time before you use it. So this by itself wouldn't be a problem going out freezing. Unless you actually mixed some up, then it would be an issue. But yeah, I don't know about the Gorilla Glue and things like that, but most of your PVAs, they're going to have a problem if they freeze. What's next?
All right, TheFantasic MrFox says, I'm not sure if it's already been stated, but what is the #1 glue, or more than one?
Well, I had it all for different standards, and keep in mind, if you go to the list on the video, if you want to, you can see all of the raw data on there. Any glue that has over 200 psi is going to be a good wood glue, because if it goes over 200 psi, generally the wood is going to break long before the glue. Because of the test rig I had, I'm able to test the glue joint itself and put all that stress right on the glue. And so most of the time, I could get the glue to fracture before the wood does. But in an average functional joint, anything over 200 psi, the wood is generally going to break long before the glue does. So any of these high number, high quality glues are well overkill. So you don't always need the strongest glue to be able to do what you want to do. So that being said, for long grain to long grain, the highest one was Elmer's Max Glue, Elmer's Wood Glue Max. That really surprised me, but it was way out there at 581 psi. So almost 250% of what was required for a wood glue to be a good glue. Yeah, it's like 50 psi farther than the next closest one. For exterior conditions, the best one by a long shot was wood weld. Weldwood. Oh, I keep saying that wrong. Weldwood, not wood weld. Plastic resin. So that was really, really good for exterior conditions. Surprisingly, almost all of, let's see, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 7 are all super glues for exterior conditions. So if you're not using that, then a super glue or an epoxy is what you want to use outside. And that really surprised me. For the exterior conditions, the super glues held up really well, even through the expansion and contraction of being outside and freeze and thaw cycles. For gap filling, number 1 was actually JB Weld, which I was not expecting JB Weld to do well, but for gap filling, it actually held up really well. Number 2 was fish glue. And then number 3 was Titebond's Quick and Thick, which, oh, there it is, Titebond's Quick and Thick. So surprisingly, pretty well on that. Elmer's Wood Glue Max was also 4th place for gap filling. So, yeah. Let's see, what do we got next? But yeah, JB Weld. I wasn't going to try that, but then I had several people like, you got to try JB Weld because it's like JB Weld. And it actually did really well. It did really well except for exterior conditions. It fell apart in exterior conditions, which really surprised me. Let's see, long grain to end grain. So, you know, when you're gluing a board end grain in, that was a slaughter. Very few did well. But number 1 on that was also Weldwood plastic resin. So yeah, if you're doing end grain glue ups, that's a really good glue. And then we had a couple of the German glues, and then number 4 was JB Weld. So those all did really well. Yeah, and fish glue and Gorilla's wood glue was up close to the top too. Let's see, and then the long grain to long grain, the one that everyone's worried about. So, you know, long grain to long grain. Number 1 was Elmer's Wood Glue Max, and then Loctite Premium. So one of the construction adhesives. It was the only construction adhesive that stood up. Loctite PL Premium did well long grain to long grain, but all of the other ones, it really fell apart. Number 3 was the cheap superglue. The superglue that I bought at the dollar store was the number 3 wood glue for long grain to long grain, which, the dollar store glue that comes in that little tiny squeeze bottle that did number 3. Let's see, and then we had the Type On 2 Extend, East Coast Resin, West System Epoxies, Meko Special, and several others. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why I want to look into Elmer's Wood Glue Max. Can I buy it in a gallon form? And it is incredibly strong stuff. And then the 4 quarters was right up there in most of those too. So yeah, some interesting things in there.
So I have a question.
What's that?
So you said these were different glues than from the first test.
The list I have here is the compilation
Is
of
the
both
compilation
tests.
of both tests.
Yep, all 64
okay.
glues.
That's what I was trying to.
Yep. No, that was the other thing is I was kind of worried about how well do the numbers match up. Is there going to be a problem with the glues that I did this time, being stronger or weaker than last time because I'm doing something differently? I was very surprised that, I was very happy, not surprised because I kind of expected, but I was very happy to find out the numbers all came out pretty even. So it was a fairly straightforward comparison from one to the other. So yeah. What else we got?
Dennis Meko asked, how do you know when glue has gone bad?
That's a very hard thing to do because, like, if I were to have it in a gallon like this, it is something that there isn't really a point at which it goes bad. It just slowly gets weaker and weaker and weaker. And from the day you buy it, it gets weaker and weaker and weaker. And then later on, the strength tends to drop off faster and faster as it goes bad faster. And so there really isn't a point that you say at this point. So basically, the only way to really know is to ask the manufacturer and say, what time is it? And this one this one doesn't have the expiration date on it. For my glues, I only buy enough that what I'm going to use in a year. So generally, most of my PVAs I don't have for much longer than a year. But most of the time, a PVA can sit for 2, 3, 4 years and still be completely good for general woodworking. I've actually used PVA glue that's been 5 or 6 years old and still works perfectly fine. So yeah, but yeah, like interesting ones like West System Epoxy is supposedly only good for a year on the shelf, and that's what it lists as. But I know people who use it for 10, 15 years and don't notice any difference at all. The reason they have that on there is a lot of people use West System glue for structural use. So I was actually building an airplane made out of fiberglass, and the resin I used was West System Epoxy. And because of that, I needed to know the actual strength of the epoxy because I was building an aircraft that would be holding me thousands of feet in the air. And they put a date on there because they know they've tested it to that ratio, and they know that during that time, that 1 year period, it will live up to these standards. Later on, the standards might drop off slightly and be outside of that standard range, but it'll still be incredibly strong and just as good. They just put a date on there because they need to legally have a measured time that they can actually adjust, know what the strengths are. So that's something you kind of have to look at. Each glue is a little bit different. Like this Weldwood, I don't even know if it has an expiration date because it comes in a powder form, so it can probably sit on the shelf for just about ever. High glues, as long as you keep them dry, they're good forever. It's not something that really goes bad. So every glue is a little bit different. Uh-oh, we're getting a visitor. One of the kids is coming down, so someone's going to pop in.
Probably someone to tell us she's done with her homework.
What, Melody? Oh, she's not going. What we got?
Oh, no. Hello, sweetie. Your light's supposed to be out in bed.
Sorry.
You want to tell everybody hi?
That'd be a good thing to actually list on there and have expiration dates. Maybe I should do that in the research when I actually go into looking at the price per ounce.
Hey, close
and
my door.
listing in shelf life or listed shelf life. I do that too. That'd be another good one to have in the list. What else we got?
Sorry, someone just said they glued their little brother to the kitchen floor.
I've glued my tongue to my finger.
And no one is surprised by it.
Yeah, I had super glue on my finger, and it's like, oh, there's a little chunk on there, and I went to pull it off, and my tongue is stuck to my finger. It was not a happy experience.
All right. Let's see. Weldabar asked, for the outside tests, were the samples constantly wet?
No, they were not constantly wet. I had them all go through 3 freeze-thaw cycles. So they all were, they all got wet and then dried out, and got wet and then dried out, and they all went through the freeze-thaw of the exterior condition. They all spent at least 1 day under the snow. They went through the whole gamut of being wet and dry and frozen, and wet and frozen and dry and frozen. So there was a lot of expansion and contraction there. And then they were tested in a wet condition. So I had them thawed but wet when they went into the testing frame. And so that way they were basically in the worst possible condition when stress would then go onto the joint. So that was how they were tested. And probably about 60% of the blocks fell off before they even made it down to the test frame. So it did not take much for most glues to just pop loose and not even have any pressure on them, just sitting on the wood block and breaking loose. So that was actually really, really surprising. So yeah, if you go into the raw data, if you see zeros, that means the block literally fell off the frame before it even came down to be tested. So not happy.
It even got snow, not just wet. Like,
what's that?
so it was even snow.
Yes, full freeze-thaw cycles.
Well, it can freeze outside and not be. Anyways.
Well, yes.
Let's see. What does the dude have to say? Since you tested some German glues as well, I'm sure you tested Ponal?
Ponal, yes.
Ponal?
I don't know how it's pronounced.
How
yet.
good, bad are the results for this
I
spring?
tested several different Ponals, and they held up right around the same as most of the tight bonds. The what was it? The Ponal Holzen Fast, or no, Watts are Fast. The waterproof Ponal was actually really good. That it was really close to like a Tight Bond 3, except for it wasn't. It said Wasterfast, or however it's pronounced. The waterproof, it's not waterproof. So just like Tight Bond 3 says that it's waterproof, it's not waterproof. That I would love to know how they came up with the idea of how that's waterproof, because I had most of the blocks for this did not even make it downstairs. They just fell off outside. So, yeah. But yeah, if you want to go look at those, they have the whole list on the sheet for all of those. I have Ponal and what was the other German glue? UHU, what was it? Yeah, UHU. I tested several of theirs. Those are actually sent to me by Marcus, who's from Germany. So it was kind of cool to get those. But yeah, they stood up pretty close to what all of the other PVAs were. They're right in line with what everyone else does. What we got?
Hey, I'm sorry.
Ooh, she's
Try
yawning.
not to yawn.
Throw something in there.
Did you just say you were going to throw something at me?
In the yawn.
Your aim's not that good, I'm safe. So Tim Cheatwood
Hey, Tim.
asked, have you considered testing multiple samples, as in multiple tubes of the Dollar Tree or Dollar Store super glue, to test for consistency between the tubes?
I have not, because when I did the Dollar Store glue test, I did not expect it to be any good. Now, I bought the Dollar Store pack. I had 6 tubes in there, and each one was just a tiny bit of use. And I used all 6 of those throughout the glue test, so across those 6 tubes, it was all the same thing. But I'm assuming they were all manufactured at the exact same time from the exact same vat. So I don't expect there to be much difference between those individual tubes. But, you know, they actually did hold up very close to what 2P10 was. So most of the super glues I tested, it depended more on their viscosity, how thick was the super glue in its application. Like the thin glues, in grain to long grain, did not do very well because the glue just absorbed into the wood and there was nothing left to actually attach them. But the thick glues, the gels and the thicks, actually held up really well in grain to long grain because they had something to seep into. And so it really depended more on the viscosity of the glue than the type of glue. And I do want to actually test some more super glues in the future, but we'll see. I'm really interested to see what the long-term test is on super glues because, I mean, they hold up really well in the short term, the couple weeks before actual testing. But yeah. What's next? Oh yeah, Tim. Let me know if you're going to be going to the peach meet. So, looking at going out there possibly. What you got?
All right. So I'm not sure which glue exactly Paul Showers is referring to, but he asks, is it good after it freezes?
Most glues, no. PVAs, once they're frozen, their strength value goes down. So if it freezes, generally throw it out and get something new. There are a few exceptions to that, but most glues, no. Most epoxies are okay with freezing because there's nothing that actually freezes. They just go to a lower temperature. But PVAs don't.
All right. I think we've caught up on all of the directly applicable questions. The next couple go a little off
Okay,
topic,
got a little bit of
if
time
that's
left.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Evan StCyr, I don't know if you're still on because these were asked really early on. But he wanted to know where you get your wood.
I get it at a lot of different places. Usually I go to Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. I look for local sawyers. I try to get my wood from there. If I need something fast, I will go to the big box store. Most of the lumber yards, the decent lumber yards that are going to get me a large selection of hardwoods are an hour or more drive away, and so I don't go to those unless I need, I'm building a bed and I need a whole bunch of white oak. But most of the time I'm going to try and find a local sawyer who I've built a relationship with, and I'll be like, hey, does anyone out there have white oak? And I'll find a local sawyer like, yeah, I just dropped a log, and I'll be drying. And, that really came out odd. No one was going to say anything until you started laughing.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, most of the time it's on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace.
I have little boys. All right, and then I'm going to ask the second half of his question, or his second question, and then I got another one that's more on topic. So yes, I need some parts for a Stanley 378 rabbet plane. All I have is the body and cap, but it's in super good condition. Where can I get parts like the fence, the cutter, and the depth stop?
You can't. The fence and the depth stop are worth more than the rest of the whole thing. So it's one of those things that you're not going to find. Every now and then you'll come across on eBay someone selling the fence or the depth stop. But most of the time they're going to cost just as much as buying the whole plane to get just those individuals. So yeah, unfortunately that's kind of the problem because so many of them do not come with those extra pieces. They just come with the main body and cap iron. So yeah. What's next?
They all have minds like 8-year-old boys too. So weldabar asked, I read that Resorcinol Formaldehyde glue is very good for outdoor use. It is very expensive at $45 plus a quart and uncommon. Thoughts?
Yes, Resorcinol is it's really common in boat building. As a matter of fact, Acorn to Arabella is doing that, and they were using it for a lot of their lap joints on the main boards. So like the not decking, the planking that they're putting on the outside of the boat, the stuff that actually holds the water out is literally just glued together. There's no material fasteners between them. And they're trusting glue to hold over the years and not separate. And what they're using is the Resorcinol. So it is a very, very good water-resistant glue, but it is very finicky. You need a crazy amount of clamping pressure. It's got to be at a certain temperature. But it's very, very good stuff. I didn't test it in this because it's one of those really rare glues that you don't come across that often. It's very specific use, but it is a very good glue. What's next?
All right, this is the last question I have. So,
Cool.
Tim Cheatwood wants to know, are y'all doing a Christmas Eve special next week, or did I already miss that announcement?
Yes, we are planning on doing a Christmas special. We did one last year down here in the shop, and it's a chance for the kids to kind of act out and get on camera. So we will be doing that again. We might be doing it around the Christmas tree. We might be doing it down here in the shop. We'll see about that. But that will be next week on Christmas Eve. And it'll be a chance you can come and ask the kids questions, ask Sarah questions, and just generally hang out in the shop. We'll probably do a couple giveaways and have a fun time. It'll be a very laid-back time, so expect to
Probably not an hour.
No, it's usually like 30 minutes.
Oh,
40
it's on Christmas Eve?
Yeah, Tuesday, right?
Oh.
What?
We're usually at Graham's house.
Oh.
It might not be at 8.
We'll see. Stay tuned. We'll be announcing
Maybe
it on
a Christmas Day special.
Maybe. We'll see how it goes.
Forgot we might have plans.
We'll be posting it on the Hive Mind with what we find out. Well, it might give me a good reason not to go over to the in-laws. Oh, don't look at me like that. Don't look at me like that. Don't make me do it. I love you,
They
babe.
are very nice in-laws. They are very nice to you.
On that note, are there any more questions?
Not to save you. Hang on. Someone was saying Arabella had interesting issues with their Resorcinol.
Yes. Well, most of the issues that Acorn Arabella was having was, number one, getting it up to temperature, and so they made the heat boxes that got up to temperature. But the problem with the heat boxes are they dry out the wood, and so when wood dries out, it shrinks. So they have all these clamps holding it down, but all the pressure that's needed to hold that glue in place, it's a phenomenal amount of pressure, but the boards then shrink because they dry out in that temperature, and because they suddenly shrink and dry out, the clamps are at a static point, and then the clamps aren't actually clamping enough because the board inside has actually shrunk. And so they didn't have the clamping pressure that the Resorcinol needs because the board dried out. So yeah, it was one of the problems that they were running into, but they've since figured out that issue. Well, they also did have a bad batch of Resorcinol because that stuff does go bad rather quickly. You have to keep an eye on that. But an interesting channel. You have to take a look at that. I really want to get out there sometime and shoot a video there. So it's some very, very cool stuff. But yeah, not right now. Sweet. Got anything else?
They're just telling you to sleep with one eye open.
Wise advice. On that note, I think we'll wrap it up for today. And stay tuned. We'll be talking about what we'll do next week with the Christmas special. So until next time, have a wonderful day.
Hang on, I gotta get the button.
I'm waiting. I'm holding. I'm looking.